Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rivera, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, my question is, we'll start off with respect to the Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity Act, otherwise known as Helms-Burton. Suspension of Title III of Helms-Burton, allowing U.S. citizens the ability to seek legal redress of grievances and access to U.S. courts to remedy claims against the Castro dictatorship in particular. The justification for suspending that provision for U.S. citizens is the promotion of democracy as determined by this government. How has the suspension of Title III of the Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity Act by this administration promoted democracy in Cuba?
The specifics of Title III, I'll have to get back to you, Congressman. I can't answer that question right now.
You're familiar with the Helms-Burton Act?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Helms-Burton and with Title IV and Title III, but I'm not sure if your question is what is the ramifications of that. I would not be able to fully answer that right now.
No. I don't want to know the ramifications. The administration has to claim the justification for suspending Helms-Burton as the promotion of democracy. How has suspending Title III promoted democracy in Cuba?
As I say, I'll have to get back to you on that.
All right, let's go on to the lifting of some other sanctions.
Sure.
And let's talk about the recent lifting of the sanctions. Can you provide any other example where unilateral concessions have been met with democratic reforms by a totalitarian dictatorship?
Look, let me explain to you, and we probably have a fundamental difference of opinion on these are not concessions to the Cuban government. These people-to-people programs are programs that we believe are important in advancing our fundamental interests with regard to Cuba, and that is to promote a climate in Cuba that will allow the Cuban people, in fact, to make their own determination.
Well, let me rephrase the question. Can you cite any concession by the dictatorship toward democratic reform that has ever been made in the 52 years of its existence?
As far as I know, there have not been similar kinds of legislation regarding other countries. But I can tell you this.
I'm only talking about Cuba right now. Can you cite any?
If you're asking
let me just make sure the question is clear. Can you cite any concession toward democratic reform that has ever been made by the Castro dictatorship?
Can I cite whether there's a concession?
One more time. Can you cite any concession toward democratic reform that has ever been made by the Castro dictatorship?
I can't think of any, no.
Okay. Then let's go to the specifics of what happens with these concessions.
Right. Okay.
Travel and trade. In terms of the final disposition of trade and travel-related finances, meaning the money that is generated from this activity, where do these funds end up?
Well, I think that where you're going, Congressman, is that some of the money may, I suspect, in your view, support the regime. But it's our view that the overwhelming interest...
I'm not judging. I just want to know where the money ends up. I don't want to say it supports the regime or doesn't support the regime. Where does the money end up?
It ends up in the hands of the people that are going to be benefiting from this, the Cuban people.
And when they spend it, where does it end up? When they spend it in a diplomatic store, when they spend the money in Cuba, where does it end up? When it leaves their hands?
It goes into buying goods. If they buy goods in state commissaries, it goes into, in that sense, it does go into the state commissaries. But as we see right now, Congressman, there's an enormous opportunity with the increasing trend towards privatization in Cuba.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you say state commissaries. Are there any private banks where this money goes into? Is there a private sector entity to make investments, or does money, when it is spent in Cuba, end up anywhere else but in the hands of the state in its final disposition?
I think the objective of the reforms is for the money to essentially benefit the Cuban people. If there's an ancillary support for government institutions, that is minimal compared with what our objective is in trying to empower the Cuban people through an increase in state.
So money ending up in the hands of the Cuban government is minimal. Okay. Do you believe Alan Gross is a hostage?
I think that he was unduly detained, incorrectly detained. He was held for a year, as I said earlier, and that was unconscionable. And now he's been charged with 20 years, and we demand his immediate
Can you
release.
tell me if you believe he's a hostage?
I don't think he's a hostage, no.